Yo, man.
We're full of passion and purpose, ready to build the nation with a purpose. You know it's coding. The man who put the people first, the people's champion. So make we roll with him, because we're powerful together, the BNP strong. You know it's coding. You know it's coding. You know it's coding. You know it's coding.
Yo, man.
We're full of passion and purpose, ready to build the nation with a purpose. You know it's coding. The man who put the people first, the people's champion. So make we roll with him, because we're powerful together, the BNP strong. You know it's coding. You know it's coding. You know it's coding. You know it's coding.
Yo, man.
We're full of passion and purpose, ready to build the nation with a purpose. You know it's coding. The man who put the people first, the people's champion. So make we roll with him, because we're powerful together, the BNP strong.
Go.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Sunday Reasonings. Welcome to all of you joining us from Facebook or via Facebook Live, and those of you who are, joining us through the live stream on YouTube. Thank you for joining us for our very first episode of Sunday Reasonings. With me this afternoon, we are going to be speaking to the leader of the opposition and president of the People's National Party, Mr. Mark Golding. Thank you for joining us.
Lovely to be with you.
And of course, we're going to be talking to our Senator Sophia Fraser-Binns, who is our Shadow Minister on Land, Environment and Climate Change. As you stick and stay with us this afternoon, don't forget to use the hashtags environment or economy and Sunday Reasonings. Our first topic in our series of reasonings is the environment or the economy. Do we have to choose? Yeah, that's a tough topic on this easy breezy Sunday afternoon. So before we get into it though, before we talk the environment and all the subtopics, Bauxite, the Cockpit country, COP26, we're going to get to that later on. But we really want to hear a little bit from you, Sir Golding, first. I want you to talk to us about Sunday Reasonings. Why Sunday Reasonings? How did that come about? Why you think it was important for us to do this at this time?
Well, it's been something we've been thinking about for a while. I think it's important to give people an opportunity to hear from me, see, and also hear from colleagues like Sophia, who was with me, you know, on topics within their portfolios, so they can see how we're thinking about these things. And so it's really just a part of general outreach and communication with persons who are interested in what's happening in the world today and what's happening in Jamaica, and give them an opportunity to, there'll be some sharing of ideas as well through this process. So, you know, it's the first of what we hope will be a series, and I'm really looking forward to it.
Me too. Thank you so much for just conceptualizing this, you and your team.
Yeah.
And we hope that at the end of this afternoon's discussion, we will be able to answer the question, the economy or the environment, do we have to choose? And even if we don't come with an answer after the reasoning, at least we should be closer to answering that question. It's a tough question, right? So let us start with COP26. Many persons felt like that was COP26 was the last opportunity for the world to get it right on the issue of climate change. Many persons, and Senator Fraser Beans, I want you to take the lead on this question. Some persons felt that it was a contradiction, really, for many persons, what was said on stage versus what was really happening in the different parts of their world, right? So can you talk to us a little bit about that, COP26?
Well, COP26 really was the opportunity to bring the world together to talk about the environment. As you correctly said, it was in fact the last opportunity to keep 1.5 alive. Do recall that at COP16, an agreement was struck with all countries that 1.5 would be the minimum in terms of what each of us would work towards. And
that's 1.5 degrees Celsius of increase in the temperature of the general temperature of the world over where it was in pre-industrial times. Isn't that right? Yeah.
And the reason for that, as you'd appreciate, is that with global warming, you know, and the destruction of the environment comes global warming, I should say. And as a result of that, we accept that unless or until we start reducing our greenhouse emission, then we will not stand a chance to really survive. And so 1.5 is the minimum that we are working towards to ensure that we have a chance of survival.
Right.
Now, out of that, many world leaders spoke. But specific to Jamaica, there was a conversation whether or not our actions at home were in contradiction to what was said.
Right.
And to give the Prime Minister credit, he did say the right thing. But we have some concerns because of what we have seen when you look at the situation in Bengal, which we'll talk about a little later.
Right.
When we talk about the Cockpit country, when we talk about the destruction of mangroves in Montego Bay to build a highway, which we support the building of the highway. But what we have a concern about is the environmental effect that it has. When we talk about the building of the highway in Portland, then these are things that have great concern for us, coupled with the fact that there has not been the kind of consultation which we believe that a proactive government ought to take. A government that is mindful of the importance of protecting and preserving the environment must take. And so we thought that the right things were said, but regrettably, the actions at home were in conflict.
Yeah, they were probably kind of out of balance there in terms of what is good for our economy and what is good for the environment.
Absolutely.
Really. I think there's a snippet that we're going to play right now of Mr. Golding. Yeah.
Certainly, to start, we have got to relook at the leadership of the country, because you know that leadership drives action. And so leadership in terms of the protection of the environment has got to be unequivocal in what we say, unequivocal in what we do. And that will set the tone to say we as a nation are serious about it. And when Jamaicans see the leaders getting in line and showing the commitment, not just by words, but by actions, then I believe that they too will also fall in line.
And opposition leader Mark Golding said he has been observing the developments at the summit, but he's confused by the statements of Prime Minister Andrew Holness to world leaders.
Oh, we are there saying nice things at COP. What's happening here in Jamaica is really very unfortunate and is a blemish on Jamaica's environmental performance, in my opinion.
The opposition leader pointed to some of the most recent environmental failings that have taken place under the stewardship of Prime Minister Andrew Holness.
We have the situation where NEPA refused the permit for mining in the Dry Harbour Mountains, and the minister, which was in the Prime Minister's ministry, overturned that on appeal and granted the permit. We have the mangrove forests in Hanover, which have just been cleared, decimated for hotel development. And right now we have mining, which is in St. Anne, which is decimating communities there as well. And we have effluent being released into the Rio Cobre and undermining the sustenance and economic activity of the people around Kent Village who rely on the river.
Mr. Golding said in order to avoid the same mistakes in the future, the National Environment and Planning Agency, NEPA, will have to be given more independence.
All right. So, Mr. Golding, I mean, I think you've been pretty vocal about, issues of the environment and climate change, and particularly, as we just caught in the snippet there, what you said in regards to COP26 versus what is actually happening here in Jamaica. Do you feel the same way about what you've said in the snippet?
Yes, I do. I mean, I think Jamaica as a voice among the nations has been supportive of the need to get serious about tackling climate change and so on. I'm not complaining about our international posture. And at COP26, I think we, delivered as well as could be expected there. My problem is what's happening at home, where we have so many instances where the government and NEPA, which is unfortunately housed within the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation, which in my view is a clear conflict, because the Economic Growth Ministry has as its mandate and objective producing fast levels of economic growth. And when you have an agency which is supposed to be protecting the environment within a ministry that has a mandate of driving growth, you're going to find that decisions are taken on a regular basis which subordinate the interests of the environment to the interests of commercialization and growth. And I think that's why the world is in the place it is, because we haven't given enough priority to protecting the natural environment. We don't have another planet. In Jamaica, we have finite water resources. We have finite coral reefs. And so we have to protect those assets for future generations. So I really do feel that the structure that the government has put in place is wrong. I think that the Environmental Protection Agency, NEPA, ought to have greater independence from the decision-making around economic transactions. And we've seen instances in the clip, I mentioned some of them, and the situation in the Dry Harbour Mountains, where NEPA, to their credit, refused the permit to this company to go and mine in this very ecologically sensitive area. Pristine forest has never been touched. And then that was overturned on appeal to the minister, within the Prime Minister's ministry, and very controversial. And we have a situation where the NRCA, the National Resource Conservation Authority Act, the penalties to act as a disincentive and a deterrent to environmental breaches are hopelessly inadequate and out of date, and they have not been updated. And we have situations where, for example, the beautiful Rio Cobre River is fairly frequently flooded with caustic, which is a highly pollutant material, damaging the fish and really hurting the local economy that survives around the river. So, and they're in court now. I think Windalco is in court for that, the Uton Works for that, and that's, dragging along in the court system. But it's happened since that original incident, which led them to being prosecuted. It's happened again and again. So it's not obviously a real deterrent. I think the maximum fine is 50,000 Jamaican dollars, which that's really rather pathetic. That's not even 1,000 US. So it's a third of it. It's $300 US. I mean, what's that to a multinational alumina company? So these are just instances of where I don't think Jamaica's performance is in sync with the spoken word internationally. We talk a good talk, but we're not walking the walk.
We need to dance really good dance before we can dance abroad. You mentioned mining, and we're going to get to that shortly, but we want to invite our audience in on the reasoning. Please We're going to ask a question. Do you think that we are doing all that we can here in Jamaica as it relates to protecting our environment and preparing for climate change? So drop your responses in the comments and we'll, share some of them in a little while. So mining, you did mention mining, and,
Sure.
and I feel like the temperature is increasing on that topic. You're hearing a lot of persons chiming in on it on social media, and we're hearing some in programs on television. Mr. Golding, we heard you touch briefly on it too in the previous video, and we're going to talk about what's the big deal. I want you to delve a little bit more deeply into mining and how it is that it really affects the environment and different persons. But I want to just share a tweet from Professor Wendell Abel, and that caused a stir in last week, right? that was Okay, here he says, I support mining in the cockpit. It will lift some people out of poverty. Poverty sucks. It's the greatest enemy of the environment. Look at the impact of poverty on Haiti's environment. I don't know if you heard about that that opinion of his that he shared.
Right. Well, all respect due to Prof. Wendell Abel, and somebody have a great deal of time for. But I think and he's correct that poverty is an enemy of the environment, because it forces people to live in a way which is often destructive of their local environment. So people, for example, who can't afford other ways of living, cut down natural forests to clear land for agriculture, which is a very bad way, and and burn the land to do that. The topsoil gets damaged. The organisms in the soil that enrich and provide sustenance to plants that's damaged as well. So it's not that just reinforces, I think, unsustainable agricultural practices. But the Cockpit country is an extremely important environmental asset for Jamaica, for all of our people, because it sits on top of a very important water source, an aquifer that provides water for many of the water systems and natural water systems and rivers, not just the Black River, but many rivers, including rivers like, I think, Rio Bueno, and all of the rivers in that section of Jamaica are connected to the Cockpit country. Now, you can't relieve poverty by destroying the Cockpit country or allowing people to mine in the Cockpit country. For one, mining is not something that really reduces poverty, in my opinion, because the way in which that bauxite is going to be shipped out of Jamaica to be processed in Gramercy, Louisiana. It's not going to be processed in Jamaica into alumina. So the value added of an alumina refinery, which employs a lot of people, that's not going to be there. Yes, there will be some jobs on a temporary basis while the mining is going on for the people who are involved in the actual mining. But it's a very, very high price to pay for degrading the Cockpit country, which needs to be preserved. It's also part of the Maroons' cultural heritage as well, and they have legitimate concerns about the government granting mining permits to mine in areas which are have been theirs and under their kind of loose autonomy through the treaty. I say loose because it's a give and take situation. They have certain autonomy over their local customs and practices, but they're also subject to some of the laws of Jamaica as well while they do that. But they have legitimate concerns about the Cockpit country lands being used to give multilateral companies the ability to mine there. So that's a whole other topic, but it's related to it. Right. So I think that the comment that we should allow mining in the Cockpit country to relieve poverty is really not one that I can agree with.
Yeah.
Just in support of what Mark said, that we agree that poverty is an enemy of the environment. We also agree that poverty sucks. But the fact is that when you look at what has been happening to the environment, it is only going to lead to more poverty.
That's right.
So when you have houses that are being washed away by hurricanes, when you have children who can't go to school to get a proper education because of landslide, which prevent them from going to school, all these things lead to poverty. But interestingly as well, one of the things that we also need to talk about is just the effect that mining has. There are positive benefits, we agree, in terms of our contribution to the GDP and the US earning. But if you look, for example, in the book Red Dirt, a study that was done by the Jamaican Environmental Trust, and it seeks to put a figure on the public health effect of mining, for example, vis-a-vis the economic benefit, then you understand the challenges that we face. And the other thing as well you want to look at is the number of persons who have been rendered homeless or titleless through mining. So when we talk about the issue of mining, and I'm not just limiting the discussion to bauxite mining, I'm talking about all types of extractive industries, whether it's bauxite or it's the limestone, then the fact remains that what we have found is that the effect on livelihood has been far-reaching. And not only that, but it also creates generational poverty. Because when someone is taken out of his house, through consensus, of course, not forcibly, but he can't get that title because the estate has not been resolved. He doesn't have a title to take to the bank that he can use as collateral to develop his life and his family's life. And these are the things that I believe we must look at when we're talking about mining in general. We have to look at these effects and see how, as a country, we can have a conversation and find ways to resolve them.
Yeah, I mean, climate change is a real threat to populations globally, and coastal populations. It's anticipated that there will be a significant rise in sea levels as a result of the warming effect and the melting of the polar ice caps and so on. What is then going to happen is that the sea will rise, and that will have a tremendous adverse effect on on coastal communities. Many of those communities will be people who may be considered poor, and they will be badly impacted by the rising sea levels over time. So, to say that we must embark on environmentally unsustainable practices or practices that can endanger things like critical water resources so as to relieve poverty is really a very short-sighted view.
This kind of reasoning is important because we have to go beneath, some of the things that are being said. We're not just opposing for the sake of opposing. There's a lot of conversation to be had and a lot of digging and that extracting that needs to take place.
As well as the
Really,
and
right.
There's a lot of information out there, but one of the things that I have discovered is that the information is not simplified so that persons can understand. So one of the things that we have to do is to have the discussion in a way that everybody understands. So the man down in the farmer down in St. Elizabeth understands. The lady down in Abuka, where mining is taking place, understands. And that's why even the EIA, which we're not going to talk about today, when we talk about the environmental impact assessment, a document such as that needs to be so simplified that everybody, you don't have to go to university to understand what is contained.
Or even the people that go to university like myself, the mother and professional that needs it broken down.
And
so
the environment is just too important for it to be treated in an academic way.
Right.
We really have to bring it to the level that everybody understands the importance of it and the way in which they can play a role as well.
Okay. Senator, you go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, one of the points that Sophia made just now was about the public health costs of mining. And I don't think that's immediately obvious to everybody. But the truth is that the dust and pollutants and emissions from that are caused by the activities of the production of aluminum from bauxite and from bauxite mining, people in those local communities suffer terribly.
Absolutely.
They live in a dust-infested environment for long periods of time. It causes all kinds of respiratory and other complications and problems, and it's really not fair on them. So, I think Jamaica has benefited from foreign exchange earnings over the years and employment, and there was a time when the bauxite and alumina industry really generated a significant contribution to our economy. That has tended to fall over time. So I'm not saying we should abandon it. Obviously we can't, because there's investment there and so on, but we have to ensure that the longer term view is also factored into account when we're deciding how we treat with them now, because they won't be here. We won't have bauxite reserves forever. It's an extractive industry. You're taking it out, and so eventually it will be depleted and it will be done. And what will be left behind? But a massive environmental problem. The red mud lakes, which is the toxic, the craters,
for restoration that takes place after mining.
Right.
So there are tremendous costs to Jamaica from the long-term costs that are being incurred from those activities.
Senator, you had mentioned red dirt in your sharing a little while ago. We're going to get to that, but I want you to talk to us a little bit about the buffer zone that you've mentioned before. What is that really? And
Right. Well, essentially the buffer zone. So again, for our listeners who may not have always been following the environment, if I may put it in context, the government of Jamaica made a declaration in Parliament of what is called a no mining area in the Cockpit country.
Right.
So those of us like myself from St. Anne know the entire area as a Cockpit country. But what the government has done through consultation, to some extent, is to declare a subset of that area as a no mining area, which means you're not supposed to do any form of mining, not just bauxite, but no form of mining
at all there.
No, what we being the opposition and other stakeholders have always been asking for is for there to be a buffer zone. A buffer zone is almost like a no man island, wherein there is it's a piece of land, so to speak, between the area where you can mine and the area where you cannot mine.
Okay.
And the reason why that piece of land is so important, or that area is so important, is unless you have that, it is going to be very difficult to say you are not mining in the no mining area.
Okay.
So having done the declaration of an area, there's a process called ground truthing, where you actually go on the ground to make sure that everything is in line. And that the borders and everything are there. But it's very difficult. We're not talking about two separate buildings here, right? So it's very difficult to say you're mining here, but you're not mining there. And so what we have said, give us the buffer zone, which is a protected area, wherein you cannot cross over there to get into the no mining area.
Okay.
And that has been the position of us, and we continue to advocate for that, because we believe that it is a positive step towards protecting what is deemed the Cockpit country protected area. And if I may, as you speak about the buffer zone, I want to also use the opportunity to say that one of the things that we have always called for, we continue to call for, is for there to be a protection in law of the Cockpit country protected area, because the declaration has been made in Parliament, and then you have the ground truthing, which is now complete. But what we do not have is any legislative protection. So if somebody goes into that area, the no mining area, and mines, there's no legislative recourse because there's no protection.
And there's no recourse if the government decides to change its policy.
Absolutely.
Because it's not enshrined in law.
Absolutely.
And that's not just this government, any future government. It should be it must be enshrined in law.
So where are we? Are we making any headway with having that legislative?
Well, to my knowledge, we have not started the process. I'm not sure if it has started, but certainly from that which I know, we have not. What I do know is that before we could get to legislative protection, you'd have to do the ground truthing, which was recently completed.
Good.
So I'm hopeful.
But you can run these things in parallel. So you could be preparing the law while you're doing the ground truthing. So as soon as it's finished, you can enact a law that supports the actual boundaries and the buffer zone around.
Right.
I don't know if that's happened though.
Yes.
Okay. So we hardly hear much about the after effects of red dirt, Senator, mining, especially on farmers. Can you speak to us a little bit about that?
And I do want to make a recommendation for persons who have not yet read it, that they can go to the Jamaican Environmental Trust website and they can read it. And it's done in a very simple way. But the truth is that so often we do not talk, Mr. Golden, and I'm struggling to say Mr. Golden because I'm so used to calling Golden.
You can call me Mark. Call me Mark.
You can call him Mark.
But Mark spoke about the effect on livelihood. But I want to share with you that I went to St. Elizabeth and St. Anne in my portfolio, under my portfolio as shadow spokesperson, and I met with the residents there and I spoke to them, and they took me into communities. And I saw for myself the effect it has not just on the houses and the furniture and the individuals in terms of their health and the rashes and the effect of children not being able to go to school because of the respiratory challenges and the financial aspect because they have to go to the doctor. And that's for another discussion to talk about how the bauxite companies manage the medical side of things. But what I saw also shocked me because I saw farms that were withered. And based on the account of the residents, this is as a result of what they call the dust. So, when you have the mining and then the dust and it blows up and then it spreads all over. And so farms were withered. I saw sweet peppers that could not be reaped. I saw callaloo and lettuce and those things that you could not reap because, when you have a long drought, that's what it was. They could not. But also interesting that I saw was the actual water. So so again, these are communities where you have a lot of rainwater harvesting because of the irrigation challenges.
Right.
And so they have to catch their water. For persons who don't know, they use gutters or they use drums. And when it rains, you catch the
Catch
water
the
in these
water.
containers,
Mhm.
and they use the containers for domestic purposes, but also sometimes to irrigate their farms. And when you see what is happening, we're talking about persons who farm for acres, and because of the effect of the dust and other things related to mining, they can't reap, or they reap far less than they anticipated. And so they operate at a loss. And these are some of the things that are not spoken about, but these are some of the realities that persons in these communities have to deal with, you know. And then we talk about the mud lake, and the mud lake, because during periods of drought, then there's or when the factory is not working, then what happens is that the effluent, so to speak, is contained in, you know, this area which they call the mud lake, and then it gets dry.
Yeah.
And when it is not watered, it blows up when the breeze, when the breeze blows, and then it spreads all over. And the same effect.
And remember, that dust is toxic.
And it is toxic.
Because it's that red mud is the byproduct of the process of producing alumina from bauxite. Alumina is a whitish powder that is then smelted overseas into the metal called aluminium or aluminum, depending on which pronunciation you prefer. But in the process of making the alumina from the bauxite, they use caustic, which is a very alkaline, strongly alkaline and chemical. And that the resulting effluent from the process is channeled into these red mud lakes, and it's very highly alkaline. And then when that dries out, the dust has that in it. So it's very, very bad for the environment.
It's very bad for the environment. It's bad for humans. It's bad for crops. It's really, I can't see the positive effect of it. And this is something that, you know, I'm sharing my experience. But if you talk to the persons in the community, and perhaps it's something that we should really undertake to do, comrade leader, to go into these communities and talk with them. I do recall when I went into St. Anne, the man took me to his house and showed me behind his house what was happening, and the landslide that was taking place after mining, you know, and he was brought to tears. And I will give Naranda their due, because having brought it to Naranda's attention, they addressed it. But there's so many other persons like him who are affected by mining. And I think, you know, this is the kind of conversation that we need to have, so the country becomes aware. Not that you're saying no to mining, but we're saying let us have a conversation about how we can find an alternative that is environmentally friendly
and sustainable. But I just want to make one point as well. You know, consciousness around environmental issues has been something that has been evolving over time. So as the phenomenon of global warming has become more and more substantiated scientifically, so that people know that this is really something that is going to will threaten the future of this earth as a home for mankind and the animals and everything else. It has, I think, must have an impact on our policy and our approach to protecting our natural assets, the environment, you know. So I'm not saying decisions in the past were not damaging. Decisions have been taken over many, many years, which were probably not the correct ones in terms of the right balance between protecting environmental assets and the need to generate economic returns, you know. But I don't think the fact that we've made errors in the past means that we need to keep on making these errors. We need to correct them. The whole world needs to correct them. This is not just a Jamaican phenomenon, you know. Every country is facing the need to adjust the way in which we operate and the kind of economic activity we get into, and how we can modify how we do things so that it's less damaging to our future as a race, as a people, as a
small island developing state, because the fact is, particularly because we're a small island developing state with so many coastal communities, we have got to, more than other countries, to be very conscious about what we do. I mean, our earnings, our livelihood, everything depends on our survival, really, how we keep our environment.
I mean, we have a big tourism industry, massive investments in hotels, and, you know, a lot of those hotels are right by the coast.
Absolutely.
So we need to protect those industries as well, and those investments. And, you know, rising sea levels are going to threaten some of those properties. So we need to be serious about this. And that's what COP26 was all about. It was trying to reaffirm the seriousness of the world to tackle this matter in a serious way.
All right. So let's see what some of our farmers have to say about this issue.
Bauxite mining in Jamaica has dislocated families and whole communities.
Some places they come to do the mining, they turn us off the area.
The whole place is a mine out and we now get nothing.
Farmers have lost crops and lands without adequate compensation.
Whenever the time is dry, like cabbage, turnip, sweet pepper, tomatoes.
Corn get licked, potato get licked somewhere, man.
The dust just burn them away.
Even though some lands are reclaimed after mining, farmers lament the lost fertility.
How much people stop farm, the land they messed up.
These lands, some of them are just a foot. They have no substance, so they perish.
They feel their voices have gone unheard, and they feel helpless in the fight to mitigate the adverse effects of bauxite mining.
I fix you out a livity. Because anywhere in dig and left, have pure rock stone left there.
1999, 2000.
All right.
Yeah, man.
Thanks to our farmers for sharing with us there. So we're going to get to effluent. It was mentioned, and we're going to talk about what that is. We're going to get some questions from our audience online. Damani Calda on YouTube is asking, for the people that keep talking about the need for aluminium, there's enough out of the ground.
Already?
Out of the ground, other countries are recycling aluminum. What are we doing? Are we understanding that? For the people that keep talking about the need for aluminum, there's enough out of the ground, other countries are recycling aluminum. What are we doing? Yeah, so he's
I mean, it's true that recycling is very important and is being done because it's economically feasible in certain instances, but there's still a demand for new aluminum. Otherwise, the mining companies wouldn't be mining it and it wouldn't be produced and sold. So there still is a demand. Remember, as the economy of the world evolves, the need for lighter metals and so on in new technologies is continuing. So, and aluminum is a very light metal, so it's particularly useful for things, structures that, for example, transportation systems, where, you know, the heavier they are, the more energy you use to move, you know, and so if you can lighten them, obviously they're more energy efficient, and it's more cost effective, etc. So there's still a demand, and there's a growing demand. That's why the price for aluminum, right now, the price for aluminum is very high. Yeah.
All right, so we have another question here. I'll just take this one and, you know, we'll continue. Jabem from Facebook has asked, can the opposition legally intervene and ask for a moratorium on these extractive industries until an independent assessment is done to determine if this is beneficial for our country?
That's a great question. Yeah. And I like the idea of an independent assessment of the benefits of this industry, because, you know, I think we really are going to need to do a proper objective assessment of what mining makes sense for us as a people and what mining does not. But the short answer to his question is really no. We don't have any legal powers to intervene and stop the government doing what they're doing. The only way it can be challenged is if they create some legal violation in the process by which these permits are granted. For example, in Dry Harbor Mountain, that matter has been taken to court by citizens and citizens groups. And we, you know, we're showing a close interest in that litigation. And what's very important about that case is that I think it's the first time that they're relying on the Charter of Rights and the right in the Charter to an environmentally safe, clean environment, and saying that the granting of the permit has offended and violated the constitutional rights of the people who are going to be adversely affected by that. And so it's a very important case that's being brought before the Constitutional Court.
And you know, again, just following up what you said, Mark, the fact is that the PIOG should be doing a study on the effect of the mining industry. I'm not quite sure what has happened to that study, but to my certain knowledge, it's not yet complete. And it is so important because, you know, when you talk about the economic effect of it, when you talk about the effect on people's health, we talk about the effect on people's life and livelihood. These are some of the things that we have to consider in going forward. I mean, we all know that a study was done, and it is estimated that the mining industry has another 30 years. But how much do we know about how it affects people's lives, their health, you know, their homes? These are some of the things that we have to ask, and regrettably, we don't know as yet. And so it'd be good to see what's in that report when the PIJ completes it.
And it's worth bearing in mind that the industry is actually operating at a fairly low level now in Jamaica and has been for a while because Alpart is closed, which is one of the bigger alumina refineries in name, St. Elizabeth. Jamalco is closed now, basically because they had a terrible fire there not long ago. Kirkvine, which was in Mandeville, it has been closed for years now because it's a small plant and it's not economic to operate it. And the one at Uwerton is operating. So you really have just Uwerton functioning right now, you know. But when all of them or three of them come back on stream full 100, you know, you can imagine what the impact it's going to have. So this is a really serious debate that we're having. And I'm not saying there are going to be some serious ecological costs by continuing the industry. But let us try and minimize them as much as possible. And let us ensure that we don't damage the very sensitive areas that can never be replaced, such as, you know, the forests of the Dry Harbour Mountains, the Cockpit country with the water resources on it. And let us ensure that the companies that are extracting and are making money out of producing alumina from our bauxite, that they live up to their side of the bargain when it comes to rehabilitation of the lands afterwards, and providing titles for those citizens who have been displaced and all that kind of thing. They've got away with far too much because we have not been effectively enforcing some of the requirements for years.
Mark, the truth as well is that one of the things that we have to do is to make sure our laws are modernized. You know, when you look at the laws that govern some of these things, take, for example, the National Resources and Conservation Authority Act, the NRC Act. It's outdated, it's over 30 years old. You know, I have tabled a motion in the Senate asking for a joint select committee to be set up to review it because we have to review the fines. But truth is, NEPA, do we need to give NEPA its own law? This is another question that we must have because apart from enforcement, we also have a situation where the laws that we can use are just old, they're archaic. And the other thing as well is, notwithstanding the fact that the laws are old, the power that the government has, the government of the day, they must use it. So we do know that the law provides that the government can revoke a permit if there's a breach. Has that been done? I'm not aware of any being done. I'm not aware of any being done, but I want to be corrected. But that is something that would send a strong message that we're very serious about.
But it's not likely to happen when the Environmental Protection Agency is sitting within the Ministry of Economic Growth. They're not going to shut down a project that they've, you know, tried to encourage people to come and do to try and drive growth. Unfortunately, that ministry has had very poor results in generating growth anyway, but that's a whole different story.
But it's problematic though, as you pointed out.
It is because it lacks independence.
All right, so we're going to get into talking about effluent and its effects shortly. But we're going to look at a video really quickly regarding the fish kill in Rio Cobre.
1999, 2004, 2005, 2018, 2019. Now, the residents who live along the banks of the Rio Cobre in Kent Village, St. Catherine, are back in the news again, and their concerns are no different than they have been in recent years.
It happens so many times, we're sick of it, we're tired of it.
The river has been in spate since the recent heavy rains, but residents told us there were still signs that the water was contaminated.
They are blighting our future. The young kids, them swim in the river, them play in the river daily. Was now school, now open. You know the kids, them the home, and them always in the river, and it's bad for them health.
We were told the water has been contaminated all week, and residents have not been able to retrieve their fish pots.
Lying in the Rio Cobre, the bed of the Rio Cobre, are fishes that were killed over the weekend. And the place is very contaminated. As we are standing right now, it's very, unbearable.
Now, as they watch and wait for the water to return to normal, the residents are irate of the lack of response from the authorities.
We want to know what's going on. Because river we live off of, buy with daily bread. And you see, right now we don't have no fish to catch in the river. So right now we need somebody to come out and talk to us.
All right, thanks. Mr. Golding, so we heard you speak before on effluents being emptied by bauxite companies into Rio Cobre, right? For those watching who may not be familiar with the term, I know you mentioned it before. As a matter of fact, we kind of spoke a little bit about it. Can you break it down for us? What exactly is it?
Okay.
And how important is that to this conversation?
Well, effluent generally is just the byproduct of a industrial process, like a factory or whatever. When they're doing their things, there's some waste matter that is produced from that. And if it's in a liquid form, it's referred to as effluent.
Okay.
Now, in the case of the Rio Cobre River, my understanding is that some of the red mud lakes, when there's a lot of rain, they get filled up and they overflow, into the Rio Cobre River. And depending on how bad that overflow is and so on, it can really damage the life of the fish in the river and the people who rely on that, who are some of the people who are talking in that video that we just saw.
Okay.
And this has been a repeated problem. It's happened several times. And, you know, and of course, the penalties in some parts of the world, if you were to do that, you'd be paying some serious money, you know, to compensate those residents. They don't get any compensation from it. Yeah. And I mean, the fine is really illusory, 50,000 Jamaican dollars. This is 300 US. So, you know, it is the update that Senator Fraser being Sophia's motion is calling for, to update the environmental laws to give it some proper teeth. That needs to be debated. That committee needs to be established and it needs to do its work. And we need to enact the resulting legislation quickly, because we have to change the mindset of these. Any companies that think they can just come here and operate any way they like, because some of them have no respect for the Jamaican environment and the long-term impacts of what they're doing to our people here. We have to change that.
How easy would it be for the NRC Act to be amended for stiffer penalties, for example?
You know, the truth is that the ministry could go ahead and proceed to make the amendments and go through the regular process of their committee and then take it to the parliament for this for passing. And that perhaps is a shorter process. However, we are proposing a joint select committee. And I tell you why we're proposing a joint select committee. The joint select committee allows for every Jamaican who wants to make a contribution to make a contribution. Yes, that's what it does. So it's not something that takes place in an office somewhere.
Closed off,
it allows anybody who wants to. The issue of the environment is so important, so critical, and concerns all of us, that I believe that each and every Jamaican should have a voice in the type of legislation that is going to be used to protect us. Remember, you know, that is the principal legislation to protect the environment. There are other legislation like the Forest Act and different things, but that is a principle because it also establishes NEPA, which is the National Environmental Protection Body. So it protects that. And the other thing as well is Jamaica signed what we call the ESACO agreement, which speaks about consultation. And one of the benefits of that is that it allows all stakeholders to have a win-win. You may not get everything you want, but at least everybody wins at something. And a joint state committee is giving effect to that, the ESACO agreement. And so we support that. It's going to take a little time, but I tabled that motion in June. I'm just thinking that the State of the Nation debate in the Senate, Mark, started in June and was completed 2 weeks ago. If we had started that debate and passed that debate in that motion in the Senate and set up that joint state committee, we could have finished, because several committees have been set up since then, finished, and have been, the ZOZO, for example, is one of those things, and have been tabled in the parliament. So it really is about a priority. It really does boil down to priority, and I'm hopeful that we now have a new minister with responsibility for environment, Minister Samudo. And I'm hopeful that through our shared passion, and I know his commitment, that we can see some action going there.
Yeah, it's, you know, the agenda of Parliament is not set by the opposition, it is set by the government. So the determination as to what motions get debated when, what private bills come on the order paper to be debated, that we have no say on that. You know, all we can do is ask and pressure, but ultimately the decision is made by the governing side. So that is why public pressure is very important.
Very important.
Because as politicians, people, you know, we have to respond to what the public is concerned about. So the public coming behind an issue like this will provide the necessary impetus for people to make the decisions that need to be taken to move us forward.
All right. I'm getting the questions coming in from our viewers on Facebook and on YouTube, and I want to tell you thank you, remind you to use your hashtags economy or environment, and hashtag Sunday Reasonings. We have a question here from Stafford Gordon on Facebook. He says, I want to ask one question. Where does the bauxite money go?
All right. Well, there are different
Where
aspects
does it
to
go?
bauxite money. Okay. So the companies who are granted the mining leases to mine the bauxite, in one instance on the North Coast, Noranda, they export the raw bauxite to America to be processed. So we get very little from that other than a royalty, which is, I think, 50 US cents a ton. It's a very small royalty.
But no, the government is 51% share.
Yes. Now, in the 70s, Michael Manley determined that the Jamaican people need to make some more money out of this. And so we put in place the bauxite production levy, which was a very important piece of legislation because it required that a tax be paid to Jamaica by these companies. And it wasn't dependent on what profits they declare. It was just dependent on how much they produce and what the world price was. And it was a very easy calculation to work out how much they should owe, and they couldn't hide their profits, which they're very good at doing. So Jamaica generated significant revenue from that in the 70s. And then there was a reaction to it, and that's a whole other story. And ever since now, because of the power that these companies have and their capacity to say we will close down or reduce production unless we get some adjustments, they have been successful in negotiating adjustments to the levy regime. And in fact, in some instances, the levy regime has been suspended altogether for a period of time. So who makes money out of bauxite? Primarily the companies who do and they're largely foreign owned, except for in Jamaica has 45% of that. And the Noranda bauxite, which is the one that just exports the raw bauxite, we own 51% of the assets on the ground. But I'm not even sure if we make 51% of the profits from the sale of the bauxite. I don't think that is true. So Jamaica is not getting the greatest deal from this, and we're suffering a heck of an environmental cost, which we're going to be paying for generations to come. So that independent study and that discussion is very important.
Okay, all right. So we've mentioned here NEPA, and the NEPA being under the Ministry of Economic Growth and Business Development, and we've heard
job creation.
Sir Golding speak out against that. Senator, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, my position is clearly in line with Comment Golding, and it's something that the opposition feels very strongly about, that you can't have the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation being the umbrella organization for NEPA. It just makes no sense.
Yeah.
First we had a situation where it was housed in the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation and all of environment. Then they shifted that a little bit and created a Ministry of Housing, Urban Renewal, Environment, and Climate Change. But NEPA still reported to the Prime Minister. We know what happened to that. I mean, the unprecedented 72 conditions for Bengal speaks for itself, right? So it is very clear that the objective or the independence that the framers envisioned for NEPA is not being fulfilled. Yeah. And now that NEPA and Environment and Climate Change have gone back to the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation, it makes no sense. It makes no sense because in an event of conflict, what happens?
Well, it makes sense. Makes sense if you're not really that concerned about protecting the environment.
Right. For those of us who are conscious about the environment, what happens is that when the minister has to make a determination, on which side does he go? Does he go on environment or the economy? Yeah. His main purpose is to get the 5-4, So it may have been elusive, but that is still his objective. Right. So economic growth is the objective. So the environment is not up front and center.
I mean, I should just add, in the last PNP administration, there was a Ministry of Land, Environment, and Climate Change. All right, and it was separate from industry and commerce or finance or any other agencies or departments that would have had a conflict with that activity. Now, I'm saying that's the kind of structure that if we're going to really be serious about protecting the environment, government needs to be structured in a way that ensures that there's that balance. And I mean, and ultimately, sometimes there's going to be a discussion and a debate because there are conflicting interests that need to be reconciled. But my problem is where the environment always is reconciled as being less important to other considerations.
And the reason why it is so important, and people may wonder why the opposition is making much ado about it. Let me tell you why it's important. Because the NRC Act provides that that an applicant who NEPA rules against, so if you have applied, for example, for a permit and NEPA says no, then you have the right to apply to the minister with responsibility for environment. Well, for minister with responsibility for NEPA. So what happens in that situation is that the minister is not an independent person, but the minister is a person that also has responsibility for economic growth. So the level of independence that ought to be brought to the table is absent.
Not there.
And remember again that the appeal is not open to other persons involved.
Yes.
So unlike
it's not
when
transparent.
You're applying to NEPA, when you're applying to NEPA for a permit, you have to do an environmental impact assessment. When you're appealing to and so stakeholders have an opportunity to speak, and you have to have your consultation. When you're appealing to the minister, it's just you and the minister.
Behind closed doors.
Right?
Really?
Yeah, it's just you and the minister, and I suppose the technical team. So the other persons would not have had an opportunity to be a part of the appeal and to hear the arguments. And that is why it is so critical that there is a separation between economic growth and the environment.
Right, yeah.
And it just, I think, further reinforces the need for a review of the NRCA Act.
Absolutely.
And some of these processes, which we had the benefit of seeing how they work over time, need to be reviewed and changed. The penalties need to be strengthened. Compensation provisions need to be put in there for citizens and affected communities, because there ultimately is Professor Wendell Label talked about poverty sucks. It does. And it's poorer people who tend to suffer most from environmental degradation and damage. And there's no provisions for compensating them. I mean, it's very difficult, because if you're going to rely on the common law, it's a hard road to travel to get recourse under the common law.
Since we're on the topic of ministries, let's talk about a bit of change which took place a few weeks ago, right? Mr. Golding, any comments there?
Well, we just discussed that. I mean, we tend to preempt the question. But what happened was that the ministry that was headed by young Pernell Charles Jr., dealing with housing and environment and climate change, and I think urban renewal, has been scrapped. And the environmental responsibility, the responsibility for environmental matters, has been taken back into the Ministry of Economic. All of it has
been brought on economic growth
and job creation, which is where it was before that ministry had been established a few years ago. So they've kind of made a decision to move it out. Now they've moved it back. But NEPA was always kept. The Prime Minister has kept NEPA under his thumb. And he has a number of important agencies that he has control over. And NEPA is one of them. And the problem is, as has been said, is that the main reason for that ministry, economic growth and job creation, and to have environment stuck with that is problematic.
All right, so we're gonna go into abolishing the discussion on abolishing that Ministry of Environment. But before that, we're gonna take a look at a quick video, and then we'll be right back. As environmentalist Peter Espute put it in his January 14 Lena article, government agency that regulated the natural environment. This week, with the cabinet adjustments, Prime Minister Andrew Holness has abolished that ministry altogether. Well, we kind of touched on this. I'll go. So I'm going to just, continue. Right. We have a question. We'll go back to some question. We have a question from Wendy Richards here. What is SML 173? Is it the same thing as the permit the Prime Minister gave Bengal? Senator Baines, do you want to take that one?
Sure. Well, there are two. SML 173 deals with mining. The permit for Bengal, bauxite mining. The permit for Bengal deals with mining of limestone. So I just want to clarify that.
And it's two different areas.
173, absolutely. SML 173 deals with a permit that was granted to mine bauxite that falls within St. Anne and Trelawney. Yes? And if you may recall, that an application was made by Norando some time ago to mine, I think, over 8,000 hectares. And then it was trimmed down, and further then trimmed down to over 1,300 hectares, I think the permit has been given for. And that was earlier this year. That the recommendation from the NRC is to give permission for them to mine 1,300 hectares within the St. Anne and the Trelawney area for bauxite purposes.
Right.
And that is SML 173. SML means Special Mining License. That's what it means, yes? And then Bengal. Bengal is, which is quite topical, there's an area on your way to Montego Bay, just out by Discovery Bay, called Bengal. Yes?
Yeah.
It is a part of what we call the Dry Harbor Mountains. People like me from St. Anne know that area well because we frequent Puerto Rico Beach a lot growing up. So it's part of the Dry Harbor Mountain. There's this company, Bengal Development, that applied to the NRC for mining of limestone in that area. And that is what we talk about the 72 conditions. NRC had said no, and they appealed to the Prime Minister per the legislation, and the Prime Minister overruled the decision of NRC and granted permit for Bengal to mine in that area. Now, the reason why that is so important is not just the 72 conditions, which are unprecedented, but if you do recall the national outcry when we found out that the Prime Minister gave permission for mining to be done. But you may also recall that one of the conditions was the payment of a bond, and it should have been paid by a particular time, and that bond was not paid. An extension was granted in March for it to be paid, and it was not paid. Interestingly, at that time, I do recall the Prime Minister saying that if any of the conditions are breached, then he will be the first to pull the license. Well, let me tell you that the extended bond the second time was not paid, and very quietly, curiously, a third extension was granted, which we're only now hearing about, and the bond was paid, which means that they can, subject to getting the mining license from the Commission of Mines, that they can go ahead and do the mining. And it is so concerning, not only because of how things have evolved, but because of the ecological sensitivity of that area. I mean, we have some of our most or rare flora and fauna in that area. The Discovery Bay Marine Park benefits from, because it's just down the road from there, from being in that area because of how protected. The the Dry Harbor Mountain is said to be one of the least intrusive area in that since Christopher Columbus.
It's virtually untouched.
People have gone in, but very little has been done. So it is almost, it is untouched. And the effect that it has now is, we spoke about it earlier in terms of the effect on the livelihood, the dust nuisance, and all of those things.
So what we have is the Prime Minister saying, under pressure from the public, when it was learned that he had overruled his ministry, had overruled NEPA's decision and granted the permit with these 72 conditions, that if there was any slip up, any breach,
then he's going to pull
the license.
And then,
well, there was a breach because the performance bond wasn't delivered by the required date. An extension of time is granted. A new date is set.
Once,
that date comes, it's again not delivered. Another extension of time is granted. And then a third time, they now do it. So that commitment that was given to say, I would not give them any leeway, wasn't lived up to. And they are now going to be in a position, if the Commissioner of Mines grants a license, they're going to be able to go ahead.
Wow. Let's take a look at this video collage on Dry Harbor and Norando, and then we'll be right back.
We've worked hard all our lives, and then we get this, and at the end of the day, I don't see what Jamaica's going to benefit, because the money, it's a foreign company, foreign individuals that are owning it. We know nothing about them.
Because persons are really tired of what is happening. We're talking about persons who for decades still have not received titles for their property. We're talking about persons who on end have been having respiratory challenges. I know we're talking about what's happening in St. Anne now, but just a couple of years ago, I recall touring St. Elizabeth. And when I spoke to the persons, they share with you the real health implications that bauxite mining has been having.
All the children them right now, them are fecal blood, them nose diarrhea. because them dig up the grave them.
He sent sewage water come to Gibraltar for we drink. When you boil the water, even dirt, you don't drink. We children them have running a belly.
And we believe that against the background of NEPA and the RCA's refusal in May 2020, the grounds on which they refused to grant the approval a few months ago was, and here I quote, the deleterious effect on the environment, end of quote. We believe that you cannot abrogate or infringe the right in the Constitution, except as the Constitution itself states, may be demonstrably justified in a free and democratic society. We do not believe that the statements of the Prime Minister, however well-intentioned, and of the government meet that high standard to justify infringing the right of the environment set out in the Constitution of Jamaica.
All right, thank you so much. Now we're going to head straight into our Q&A. Gosh, so much has been said here, right? So I have some questions coming in from our very engaged viewer audience on Facebook and YouTube. Love it, love it, love it. So Monair Benjamin from Facebook asks, what is being done in terms of reclaiming mined out areas and reforestation of these mined out lands? He's asking.
Well, so there are two things, and you know, I have to go back to something we said earlier about the legislation, because the legislation actually tells you that you are supposed to mine out within a particular. Once you're finished mining, then you have to reclaim the property, and then it does tell you how the property is to be reclaimed. But one of the things that we have discovered, again, just through interaction with persons in these mining communities, is that the companies will mine to a particular amount. So they'll mine to about 90% of the land, but they're not finished. And so unless you're finished, you're not compelled to reclaim the property. So again, that is something that we need to look at, you know. Is it that you have to start reclamation within 3 years of cease, even if you have not completely finished the mining process, but once you have not done any work in that area for 3 or 5 years, then is it that we should compel them to start a reclamation process. The other thing as well that we need to look at is how reclamation is done, because the law tells you how reclamation is to be done. And the truth is that how it is now being done is just not enough to bring the property back to how it was, or reasonably back to how it was prior to the mining process. I mean, I have seen so many reclamation or reclaimed lands which are still craters.
Yeah.
But when you speak to the companies, they have done the reclamation, they're put at the top soil. But is it enough? And the simple answer is no. Okay. So, you know, reclamation as it is now, it's not where it ought to be. But I believe that the law needs to be amended to give full effect to what must obtain.
Okay. And the question also arises, should they be required to post security for those obligations? Those are long-term obligations that are going to affect Jamaican people for years to come. The way in which the red mud lakes are left behind when many bauxite companies that contributed to those red mud lakes are no longer operational in Jamaica. They're not honoring those obligations any longer. We need to have legal mechanisms in place to ensure that they live up to their obligations. Okay. And that should be part of the negotiation with them.
All right. Damani Caldo, YouTube asks, precious metals like gold are being extracted from old electronics. What are we doing with ours? I don't know if that's like
I can't say I'm not aware of any sustained effort or any organized effort to mine gold from disused electronics. But what I would mention is that there are rare earth metals in the red mud extract that is in those red mud lakes. And in fact, there was a move afoot and rare earth metals are very, very valuable for some of the new technologies that exist, and it's a very valuable asset. Unfortunately, a lot of the bauxite that has been taken from Jamaica to Gramercy, which is an aluminum refinery in Louisiana, the red mud there is where they're looking to extract those rare earth metals, and it doesn't look like Jamaica will make anything from that whatsoever. And that's very unfortunate. There was one time we were looking at trying to do it here, and we had a joint venture, I think, with a Japanese company, Nippon, I don't remember the full name, but the Japanese company, there was a pilot really to look at the feasibility of getting the rare earth metals from the red mud lakes that we have in Jamaica. But the price at that time, the world market price collapsed basically for issues that are outside of our control. And that hasn't really happened, unfortunately. But it is something that is worth further exploration.
All right. Deanley Drasiki on Facebook has asked, is it legal for any citizen to block a river using large rocks, etc.? I guess maybe in response to that, you know, or civilian response to what's happening. If they decided they wanted to block the rivers, is that something that
they need a permit for that?
They would need a permit.
Yeah. Doing it without a permit would be a breach of the act.
It's not definitely not legal.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. We have environmental and climate change activist Aisha Constable, who has chimed in. She has said, and these are comments that I'm going to share, you know, because I will say there's been quite a few young voices chiming in as it relates to just climate change and what is happening with our environment. And it's really been a welcome change to the conversation on the environment and climate change. And so she says, climate responsive policies and strategies are something that we really need to ramp up. Enchanting climate resilience of the country is also something that needs our attention, and we need to build adaptive capacity of vulnerable sectors such as water, agriculture, and tourism. And another comment that she has made is, and I'm just reading them as she has added to the conversation, pursuing low carbon emission strategies for economic development. So I think she's kind of just sharing some of the things that perhaps we can look into in terms of our evolved response.
If I may say so, because Aisha is right on the ball, because you know the scientists have said that the time for environmental protection has long passed. What we're now looking at is adaptation. And certainly for countries like Jamaica, small island developing states, I mean, we really contribute negligible to the mission. So for us, it's about adaptation. You know, she mentioned water. How are we going to cope in this new dispensation with everything, with climate change, with more frequent and intensified hurricanes? How are we going to cope? How are we going to cope with deforestation? These are some of the things that, like small island development states, we have to look at. And so I am very much in agreement with what Aisha said. Looking at adaptation, and you know, we talk about the World Adaptation Fund because there is funds available for countries like Jamaica to start our adaptation process. And I think, you know, that is where our focus really needs to be. How do we get the farmers in St. Elizabeth to adapt to what is happening now with climate change? That's where our focus needs to be.
You know, public education is
going to be very important. And I want to stress not just public education as we know it, but simplified public education that allows the regular Joe to understand, not just the role he has to play, but what does this mean to him? What does climate change means to him? And how will it affect his bread and butter?
I think that's really very important on a personal level, to be able to access it.
Them personally, you know, it doesn't really mean much. It's just reality.
And the curriculum in schools, you know, children, I mean, a lot of the time it's the children who educate the parents, you know. So the messages that we need to be sending need to be included in the curriculum of the primary schools and secondary schools. So we're generating a new generation of very environmentally aware people. And the final question, or the main theme, you know, environment or the economy, which one is it? You know, it's both. You know, we need to protect the environment for our own survival as a species, and we need to ensure that we will have adequate clean water to drink in years to come, clean air to breathe, etc., etc. We also need a vibrant economy to employ people and to create opportunities for people to improve their standard of living. The two are not incompatible. In fact, there's a great move towards what they call the green economy. In other countries are looking at ways that you can, for example, move to renewables to produce energy, such as sunlight or hydro or geothermal or even waste to energy. We have tremendous waste resources in Riverton and other dumps, you know, that could be a source of generating energy which we can use in our grid to power our lights.
Yeah.
These are the kind of things when we talk about resilience. These are the kind of things that we need to try and start get going. You know, we've been talking about them for a long time, but we're not seeing any action.
I feel like those were excellent final comments from you, Mr. Golding. I don't know if there was anything else that you wanted to add.
Well, just to say how much I've appreciated your moderating this session, Rasheen, and it's been you know, the first of our series, and so it's historic in that sense. And I want to thank my good colleague, Senator Sophia Fraser-Binns, for having helped us along with her copious knowledge on environmental. She's in charge, you know, she's
Don't play with her, you know.
Her portfolio, she has studied it, and she's in touch with the stakeholders, and she's on the cutting edge. So well done, Sophia. Thank you for joining us. When I was thinking about who should be on the first one, I said, let's have Sophia, you know.
Thank you. I'm so honored to share with you.
I'm told we have one more question.
Yeah, must be answered.
An urgent question. All right. We have an coming in hot, raising the temperature, right?
Yes.
Okay. It's in my inbox. Wendy Lee from Facebook.
Oh, Wendy.
Wendy Lee, we want to go home, go eat a Sunday dinner, you know, man.
Yes, but I want to hear Wendy's
All right,
question.
let's hear Wendy's question, because clearly,
Yes,
right?
I want to hear Wendy's question.
All right. What has happened to Jamaica's master plan for sustainable tourism? We are good at making plans, but bad at adhering to them. A new plan is made whenever the old plan stands in the way of destructive development. So I feel like the initial question, what has happened to Jamaica's master plan for sustainable tourism?
Probably gathering dust in some file, some drawer in some ministry, you know. I mean, you're right. She's absolutely right. Yeah. The amount of studies and the amount of, you know, policy documents that we have and so on, and many of them are just never implemented and don't guide our conduct going forward, you know. And sustainable tourism is really important because we have huge investments in the tourism industry. Some of those investments have caused significant environmental damage, especially to mangroves, which are such a critical part of protecting coastal systems and the reefs that the tourists want to come and go and look at the fish and so on. And the fishermen need the reefs to generate and spawn new fish that we love. And I'm a fish eater myself, so you know, it's something important to me. So she's absolutely right. These things are you know, so much time is put into generating documents, but the actual adhering to them and making them guide our conduct, we're very poor at that.
And I think now, Mark, you know, now more than ever, we need to ensure that we have these policies and we stick to them. And we continue to modernize as more information become available to us. We talk about tourism. Listen, tourism is not only about the hotel and the beach. We're talking about bird watching. People want to go into community tourism because they want to go into communities and experience Jamaica's rich culture. August Town, they want to experience that. They want to go to that compound Maroon
Trench Town
and experience that. They want to go down to Trench Town where Bob Marley is. You know, Bob Marley was born. And then so these are the things, where he had this thing. So these are the things that I think we have not done enough of. We continue to sell tourism as just the sand and the sea and the hotel. But there's ecotourism and it is real. And we talk about balancing the economy and the environment. Ecotourism is one way you can do that. So we get the box that we need to develop the country and to take people out of poverty, but we also protect and preserve the environment.
And there are great examples of it. I mean, it's not just a theoretical thing. Costa Rica has built a tourism industry over ecological. I've been to Costa Rica and they have wonderful nature parks where you can walk and see all kinds of exotic birds and plants. Belize has a tremendous record now of marine sustainability and marine parks which are protected and that have allowed their whole blue assets. You know, they talk about the blue economy. You know, the fish and the other creatures of the sea are building back and their reefs are coming back and so on. We need to go that route. Jamaica is an island surrounded by water and is such a beautiful island. What land of wood and water? We can't destroy that. We'll be left with very little.
Absolutely.
Opposition Leader Mr. Golding and Senator Fraser-Binns, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Our first in a series of excellent conversations, deep conversations, meaningful reasonings on the issues that plague our country, and just really adding our voice to it and seeing how it is that we can make our country better and stronger, right? So, and to our audience, I just want to thank you for sticking and staying. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your engagement. We really appreciate it. So, on the matter of the economy or the environment, do we have to choose one? I think we can safely say both, but we definitely need a more evolved and assertive and constant approach to prioritizing our environment at this point. And if nothing else, I think the PNP, has, some really solid, really nation building what should I say? Plans. Yes, sorry, and approaches too.
Yeah. Our approach, I think we accept the need for sustainability in Jamaica and around the world. And it's not just talk, the policies and programs and decisions that are made when the rubber hits the road, when the pressures are being brought, you have to stand up and make the right decision.
Well, the right decisions we will make. All right. Thank you so much for joining us for our very first episode of Sunday Reasonings. We will be back. Is it the last Sunday of
I don't know. Don't announce
it
yet.
But we'll be back. We will be back. I can promise you for more engaging conversation, right, on some tough topics. All right. Have a great week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All the people them listen again, Calling our comrades in this moment, it's time to raise your hand. And may we continue to put in the work and improve Jamaica land. From 1938, we are lead the way and that never change. And today the strong foundation from way back when remains. We're moving forward, we not turn back, building Jamaica, yes, block by block. The People's Party working non-stop. We put few country back on top. We're moving forward, we not turn back, building Jamaica, yes, block by block. The People's Party working non-stop. We put few country back on top. Cause PNP strong. Yes, we're strong. PNP strong. PNP strong. Yes, we're strong. So come make we make Jamaica strong. Yes, we're strong. PNP strong. Cause PNP strong. Yes, we're strong. So come make we make Jamaica better. For the people, after all, we are the People's Party. From way back when in the days of Norman and Michael Manley. And then PJ take over and pass it to Sister P. And then she pass it to Peter P. No more gold in the box. PNP at top of the class. We're moving forward, we not turn back. Building Jamaica, yes, block by block. The People's Party working non-stop. We put few country back on top. We're moving forward, we not turn back. Building Jamaica, yes, block by block. The People's Party working non-stop. We put few country back on top. Cause PNP strong. Yes, we're strong. Cause PNP strong. PNP strong. Yes, we're strong. So come make we make Jamaica strong. Yes, we're strong. PNP strong. Cause PNP strong.